Hey everyone! Today we've got 8 true scary stories from people who were home alone in the Appalachian wilderness, thinking that they were alone, but they wasn't. But before we start, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and you can change your mind later. And if you've got any ideas for what the next video should be, feel free to drop them down in the comments. My aunt had asked me to house sit for a week while she visited her daughter in Knoxville. Not a big ask, really. Her place was this quiet little cabin tucked into the side of a ridge in eastern Kentucky. She called it peaceful. I called it pre-internet exile, but I said yes because she's family, and honestly, I thought the quiet might do me some good. She left early on a Sunday morning. By the time I finished hauling in some groceries and settling in, the sky had gone this dull gray that always seems to mean snow around here. I wasn't too worried. Her wood pile was fully stocked, and the generator still had a bit of fuel. The place didn't have central heat, but the fireplace worked just fine, and there were enough oil lamps stored around the house to light up a small village. That night, it started snowing. Light flurries at first, just enough to dust the trees and coat the porch. But by the time I went to bed, it had turned into a full-on whiteout. No stars, no sky, just white noise pouring from the sky and piling up against the windows. Around 9, the power cut out. I didn't panic. Honestly, I expected it. I grabbed 2 oil lamps from the shelf above the fireplace, lit them, and stacked some logs into the firebox. The wood caught fast, and within minutes the room was flickering and warm. I remember thinking it was kind of nice, in a weird way. Cozy, like stepping back in time. But then I started hearing these sounds outside. Little ones at first, soft thuds, the occasional crunch of snow, maybe a faint scrape. I brushed it off. Could have been anything. Branches falling, some deer moving through. The forest makes noise when it's alive, right? Still, I felt better pulling the curtains closed. Left one of the lamps low and tried to read for a bit, curling up in the big armchair near the fire. It was quiet except for the crackle of the logs and the occasional gust hitting the windows. I was just starting to nod off when I heard it. 2 soft taps on the front door. Not pounding, not frantic, just polite almost, like someone testing if anyone was home. I didn't move. Not at first. My heart jumped straight into my throat and I just sat there, listening. It was probably nothing, I told myself. A branch, a bit of ice falling, anything. Because it made no sense, no one should have been out there. The road was half a mile down a steep, winding drive. No tire tracks, no snowshoes leaning on the porch, no neighbors for miles. Just me. I waited. No follow-up knock. No footsteps. Nothing. I was trying to decide whether I'd imagined it when I heard another sound. Heavier this time, a dull thump against the side of the house, the wall near the window I hadn't covered. I turned the lamp lower and crept toward the window, heart hammering hard enough I could feel it in my fingertips. I didn't see anything. Just snow and trees, everything quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling. And then I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate crunches, circling the cabin. Not fast, just a slow, steady pace, like someone casing the place. I grabbed the fireplace poker and stood in the kitchen, not even breathing. When the sounds finally stopped, I counted to 60 before I dared move. I eased over to the back window and looked out. That's when I saw the footprints. Just one set. No animal tracks, no sled, no boot marks leading up from the woods. Just a line of human-sized prints that started out of nowhere, about 4 feet from the wall and wrapped around the house. They circled and stopped right below the bedroom window. I stayed up the rest of the night, kept the fire going and sat there in the armchair with the poker across my lap, eyes darting between the front and back doors. By morning, the prints were still there, clear as anything. No return path, just the one set, like someone had walked halfway around the house and vanished. I took a photo on my phone. Not that I could send it. No signal. But it made me feel like I had proof, even if it was just for myself. Later that day, more snow came and buried the tracks. I told myself it was a fluke, some lost traveler, a hiker caught in the storm who changed their mind before knocking again. That made sense, right? People get disoriented in the snow. Maybe they saw the firelight and didn't want to intrude. I told myself that again and again, right up until that night. Same knock, same soft, deliberate taps. But this time, it came from the back door. I didn't move. I just sat in the armchair, staring at the back of the house like I could somehow see through the wall. And then the scratching started. Not loud, just slow and steady, like someone running their nails down the wooden door. Not clawing, more like tracing. I turned on every lamp in the cabin. Even with the generator running low, I needed the light. The sound stopped. And then I heard a voice. It was low, barely a whisper. And it didn't sound like it came from outside the door. It sounded like it came from underneath me. Through the floorboards, you let the last one in. I went cold. Not shivering cold, just still, frozen. No one knew I was here. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't told friends. My aunt didn't have any neighbors close enough to notice me. And whoever that voice was talking about, the last one, the only other person who'd been in that cabin recently was her. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, I checked the back door. Scratches ran all the way down it, neat, parallel lines. And the knob, covered in frost. On the inside, I decided I was leaving, packed fast, loaded up the truck, brushed off the windshield, and started down the hill. But about halfway down, the tires lost grip. I slid into the ditch, nose first, no damage, but completely stuck. Still no cell signal, so I walked back up. When I got inside, the cabin was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every single lamp was on. And I know I turned them off before I left. The generator wasn't even running anymore, but somehow they were all on. One of the oil lanterns had burned almost down to nothing and was sitting on the floor near the fireplace. And on the wood floor, leading from the front door to the chair I'd been sitting in, were 2 wet footprints. Just 2. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I sat by the door with my aunt's old rifle in my lap. I told myself I'd shoot if it knocked again, but it didn't. Instead, sometime after midnight, I heard the voice again. This time, it came from out in the trees, closer than before. I remember you now. That was it. In the morning, I grabbed what I could carry and hiked until I got a signal. Took me a few hours. Finally got through to one of the neighbors down the road, guy named Reese. He came with a chain and pulled the truck out of the ditch. I told my aunt I couldn't stay the rest of the week. I didn't give her a reason. I was 33 when I got snowed in at my uncle's old cabin. It had been his since the early 80s. This beat-up place tucked into the hills outside a tiny town called Rexton in eastern Kentucky. He passed the year before and left it to me in the will. Nobody else in the family really wanted it, but I figured I'd fix it up a bit and see if it was worth keeping. Winter came early that year. By the time I got serious about repairs, it was already cold enough that the boards creaked every time you breathed near them. I didn't really worry. I had plenty of food, good cell reception, and enough propane to outlast a short storm. I figured it'd be a quiet week, maybe 10 days tops. Then the first big snow hit, and the road disappeared. I used the downtime to go through some of the stuff my uncle left behind. He hadn't stayed there full-time for a while, but his fingerprints were still everywhere. Mud-crusted boots by the front door, an old tackle box under the sink, even a rusting harmonica and a coffee mug on the windowsill. There were also these notebooks, piles of them, stuffed onto a narrow shelf in the den. Most were yellowed and barely legible. I'd glanced at them before, but now that the power was out and the nights were long, I started reading them by lantern light. Most of it was rambling dreams he'd jotted down, scraps of prayers, lists of names and dates that didn't mean anything to me. But there was one notebook that stood out, smaller than the others, square-shaped and wrapped tight in worn leather like it had been strapped shut on purpose. I figured it might be a journal or something private, but when I opened it, it wasn't writing. It was drawings, diagrams really, same room drawn over and over again. Floor plans maybe, each version just slightly different from the last. Sometimes the door was in a new spot, sometimes the windows vanished, or the walls shifted angles a little. Always the same basic setup, but never quite the same twice. The last page was blank except for a single, smudged X right in the middle. I assumed it was some kind of dream sketch, maybe something he used for visualizing stories. Still, something about it bugged me. I tried to trace the order of the pages, how the room changed, but every time I flipped back through, the sequence felt different. Like I'd lost track, or like the pages weren't in the same order as before. That night, the wind really picked up. The kind of sharp gusts that rattled the glass like it's thinking about giving in. I moved the lantern to the floor so it wouldn't tip and set the notebook aside. Next morning, it was sitting on the kitchen table. I know I didn't put it there. I told myself maybe I'd moved it while cleaning up or not thinking, but it was centered on the table, open to the X page like it was waiting for me to notice it. That made something behind my ribs go tight. I closed it and shoved it in a drawer. I tried to get on with the day, but little things kept tripping me up. My boots were turned the wrong way. A skillet I never touched was hanging crooked. Nothing dramatic, just off enough to register. I chalked it up to cabin fever. Literally. Too much time alone, too much snow, and too many weird notes from a man who once spent an entire entry writing about a bird that refused to break eye contact. That night, I went to light the lantern and it flickered before the match even got close. I shook it, checked the fuel. Everything looked fine. It stayed lit after that, but I was already on edge. I grabbed one of the regular notebooks to distract myself, tried to find something boring. That's when I saw the drawer creak open. It didn't slam or anything, just a slow, lazy slide. A few inches, enough to notice. I froze, waited. Nothing else happened. After a while, I stood up and closed it without looking inside. I didn't want to know. Before bed, I took the strange notebook and shoved it back on the shelf between two big ones, wedged so tight it crinkled. Next morning, it was on the floor next to my cot. I left it there. I got dressed, pulled on my coat, and walked down the trail toward the road to see if anything had thawed. It should have taken 5 minutes to reach the bend where you can see the clearing. But that day, I couldn't even tell where the clearing was. The trees leaned in too close. The hills looked wrong, too steep in spots I remembered being flat. It was like the trail had been stretched. Back at the cabin, the front door suddenly didn't close right. It scraped the frame like the wood had swollen. But the air wasn't damp. I checked my phone to call for help. It blinked and died. Battery was full the night before. Now, nothing. I didn't even bother trying to charge it. The power hadn't come back. Snow was still coming down. The notebook was back on the table. I gave in and opened it. New drawings. Same room, but now it had furniture bed, stove, even the lantern, all marked in heavy pencil. A second X had appeared beneath a square I figured was the kitchen counter. I turned around, and there it was. Same stain on the floorboards, same dent in the baseboard heater, same angle on the counter. Then I flipped the page. 2 rooms now. One looked like mine. The other had no door. 4 walls, one tiny circle in the center. The lines were tighter, heavier. That night, I moved the cot into the main room and stuck a knife under my pillow. Felt dumb doing it, but it made me feel a little less helpless. I woke up at one point to a faint shuffling behind the bathroom door. Called out reflexively like an idiot. Nothing answered. When I finally got up to look, the door opened like normal. The room was empty, but scratched faintly into the frost on the mirror was a shape I'd seen before. 1 room, 1 X. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the table until morning, if you can call it that. The snow was piled up over the porch windows, so it was hard to tell what time it actually was. The sky stayed a washed-out gray, the kind that makes everything feel paused. When I finally looked down, the notebook was open again. Now there were 3 rooms, 1 with a stove, 1 with no door, 1 with no light source at all. That was enough. I closed it, wrapped it in an old towel, stuffed it deep in my duffel, and sat on the cot until the snow let up. The second the trail was even half passable, I left. A week later, I mailed the duffel to the State University Archive in Lexington. I live in a city now. Ground floor apartment, no attic, no basement. I don't use floor plans. I don't buy notebooks. and I never stay anywhere alone in winter. My shift at the Municipal Records Annex started at 7. I was already sorting the transfer boxes when the first strange thing happened. The annex sits behind the main courthouse in Lanton Ridge, tucked away like an afterthought. I was filling in for Carla, one of the longtime clerks who'd taken medical leave. I'd been there about 3 weeks, long enough to know where everything was, and long enough to hate the smell-warm paper, old dust, and that faint plastic scent from the sleeves we used to preserve documents. I'd gotten into a routine. Unlock at 6:50, lights on by 6:52, inventory check by 7, same every day. But that morning, when I walked between shelving row B and row C to grab the intake clipboard, the aisle felt longer. I noticed it immediately, even if I didn't want to admit it. Normally, I could cross that space in 8 steps, maybe 9. But that day, I counted 12. I stopped, turned, and walked it again. 11 steps back. I stood there for a while, one hand still holding the clipboard, trying to convince myself I miscounted. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd walked slower. That felt like a reasonable explanation, until I paced it again, deliberately this time, and still came up with 11. It wasn't a huge difference, but it was enough. The rest of the morning was quiet. I went about my tasks, processed delivery logs, organized some historical maps from the Water Bureau. The usual. I figured it was just a weird blip. Maybe the fluorescent lights made the space feel off. Maybe my brain just slipped a gear. Around 10:30, I noticed the clipboard I'd used earlier was missing. I'm not careless. I remember putting it on the counter near the intake shelf. But now it was gone. I checked behind the printer, under the counter, even inside one of the empty archive boxes. Nothing, so I replaced it. Pulled a new form, filled in what I remembered from the morning logs, and moved on. By noon, the original clipboard was back, sitting in the exact spot where I'd left it earlier. Paper clipped neatly, signature exactly like mine. Identical handwriting too, except the letters leaned just slightly more upright, barely noticeable. I picked it up and just stared at it. Then I tucked it into the intake cabinet and didn't mention it to anyone. That afternoon, I walked the row BC aisle again. 11 steps, still longer than before. When I left for the night, I double-checked the locks. Pulled on the door handle twice just to be sure. I told myself I was just stressed, that I'd been staring at records too long. That was the only explanation that made any sense. The next morning, Friday, the annex smelled like it had been shut up for a month. Musty, too warm. The heater was on, which wasn't unusual, but it felt like someone had cranked it to full blast overnight. The thermostat was still set at 68. The back room, the overflow room where we keep old subdivision plats and tax ledgers, was cracked open. I never leave it open. The shelving in there is shaky, and the drafts make the top boxes rattle. But now the door hung halfway open, and inside several boxes were shifted forward like someone had been going through them. They weren't toppled or anything, just moved. The thing that bothered me most was the handwriting on the labels. It was close to mine, very close, but not exact. Narrower strokes, the kind you get from a finer pen. I moved them back, took my time lining them up like before. I locked the room, pocketed the key, and kept working. At around 4, I spotted our little red laser level sitting on the intake counter. That thing's used for aligning drawer rails when new cabinets come in. No reason it should have been out. I hadn't touched it in days. I returned it to the tool drawer, pressed the latch shut, and even pulled on it twice to make sure it was closed. An hour later, it was back on the counter. No sound, no creak, just sitting there exactly where it had been. I didn't take it back that time. Instead, I packed up, shut the lights, locked every door in the building, and left without glancing back at the intake shelf. Saturday, I remembered I'd left my flash drive in the annex. I figured I'd swing by and grab it quick, be in and out. I wasn't scheduled, so no one else should have been there. When I opened the door, the smell hit me immediately. Paper and warmth again. The kind of warmth that comes from a building that's been closed too long and suddenly opened to air. The light switch clicked, but the overhead stayed dark for a second too long before humming to life. I walked in, and my boots stuck slightly to the tile floor, like something had spilled and dried. But everything looked normal. The intake cart, the computer, the files. Except for one box sitting square in the middle of the aisle between D and E. I knew that box. It was from the overflow room. I picked it up and took it back. The overflow room door was shut, but not locked. My key was still in my coat from yesterday. Inside, every box had been moved again. This time they were off the shelves, arranged in perfect rows on the floor. Not alphabetically, not by accession number, just arranged. It looked like someone had spent hours organizing them that way. I stared for a long minute, put the out-of-place box back where it belonged, and quietly shut the door. I didn't bother locking it, just left. Sunday, I stayed home. Monday morning, I walked into the annex and found my overflow room key sitting on the counter. I still had it in my coat. I checked 3 times. The one on the counter was identical. The door to the overflow room was open again. I didn't go in. By mid-morning, the floor felt off again. Not longer this time tilted. Just a subtle lean to the left, like walking on the edge of a ramp. Nothing else tilted. The shelves were straight. The walls, the desk, all normal. But walking that hallway felt wrong. My body had to adjust to stay balanced. I finished my tasks early and stayed late to index. Around 7, I saw movement down the far aisle. Nothing dramatic. Just a shift of shadow, like someone passed in front of a light that wasn't there. I walked over. One of the boxes I'd reshelved had moved forward again. I pushed it back. The 3 boxes next to it slid forward. I didn't breathe. I didn't run. I turned slowly, walked to the front, shut the lights, and locked the door behind me with shaking hands. Tuesday, I found more intake forms filled out in my handwriting, except I hadn't written them. They were for future dates, 2 days ahead. I stacked them in a folder and tucked them behind the desk drawer. That day, the hallway was even more tilted and shorter. That night, I didn't bother finishing. I shut off the computer, turned out the lights, and walked out at 5 sharp. The air outside felt clearer than it had in days. Wednesday morning, I came in early, hoping to get ahead of whatever had been happening. Everything looked normal. Then I stepped into the back hallway, and it curved. Subtle at first, a soft arc where there hadn't been one. But by the time I reached the end, the path curved so far, I came back around to the intake desk from a new angle, like the building had folded. That afternoon, the emergency exit opened into a corridor that should have been outside wall. No lot, no air, just more wall. I left. Fast. Thursday morning, everything was back to normal again. Almost. The forms I hadn't written were dated for that day. My name, my signature, all correct. But not mine. I didn't stay to find out what else would change. I waited until noon, opened the emergency exit again, and this time the lot was there. I walked straight across it, didn't look back, and never returned. I was staying up at my uncle's cabin, tucked into a hollow near a place called Merrill Ridge. My uncle was spending the winter in New Mexico with his girlfriend, and he'd asked me to house sit. It was a good setup. I work remotely, and he said I could have the place to myself as long as I kept the pipes from freezing and brought in firewood. He'd left me a side project too. A bunch of old family documents he wanted scanned and organized, boxes of them. Stuff from his dad's old lumber operation, land surveys, handwritten birth records, receipts from equipment sales. Yellowed paper that crumbled if you breathed wrong. I figured it would keep me occupied. There was nowhere to go anyway, not with the snow coming in so thick. I set up a little workstation in the attic, just my laptop, a portable scanner, a folding table, and a space heater that buzzed like a fly trapped in a jar. The attic wasn't exactly cozy. It smelled like insulation and old shoes. But once I got into the rhythm, it wasn't so bad. I'd scan a few papers, rename the files, sort them into folders. It was repetitive, but methodical, kind of meditative. Then, on the second day, I spotted something weird. One of the files in the export folder had already been renamed before I'd touched it. I opened it and saw a perfectly clean scanned front and back of a marriage certificate from 1942. But what threw me off was the timestamp. It said it had been scanned and saved at 3:12 p.m. that day. Problem was, I hadn't even turned the laptop on until close to 4. At first I figured maybe I'd messed up the clock settings, or the laptop had glitched during the outage earlier in the week. The power had gone out overnight for about an hour, and I hadn't reset anything. So I checked the logs, thinking maybe it was an automatic system restore or background task. But the scan log said the document had been imported, renamed, and saved manually nearly an hour before I'd even entered the attic. Not automatically, not scheduled. It even had my username attached to the file. I told myself maybe I'd done it the night before and just didn't remember. I'd had a couple beers, was tired, who knows. So I deleted the file and rescanned the document, trying to shrug it off. That night, while I was looking through some folders, I noticed a second copy of the same document. This one was buried in a folder I hadn't touched. It didn't have a name, just a string of random characters. The image was identical. Same creases, same light stain in the upper left corner. But the image metadata said it had been modified 20 minutes into the future. Not saved, modified. I stared at that little detail for longer than I should have. Modified. It sat wrong with me in a way I couldn't explain. I closed the laptop and left it alone until morning. On day 3, I got more careful. I only worked on one file at a time. I started recording myself on a little pocket camera I use for vlogs, just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. Each document went from box to scanner to labeled folder, and I kept notes on paper in case the digital ones started getting strange again. I even started locking the attic door when I went downstairs, which felt ridiculous in the moment, but made me feel a little more in control. I took a break for lunch around 1. When I came back up, one of the water-damaged pages I'd marked as illegible had something new on it, a sticky note placed neatly on the center of the scanner. The handwriting wasn't mine. It was small and tight, all capital letters, slanted slightly to the right. Not messy, but deliberate. On the note was a clean transcription of the document's text, including names I hadn't been able to read. It even referenced something from a different page I hadn't opened yet. That was the moment I really started to feel off. I started wondering if maybe someone else had a key to the place. My uncle's ex-wife, maybe? Some neighbor checking in on things, but nothing in the cabin looked touched. I checked all the locks, windows, doors, crawl space. I even made myself open up the old root cellar out back, which I'd been avoiding. Everything was sealed up tight. The snow outside had refrozen. When I went around my cabin, I noticed something that chilled me more than the air. There weren't any tracks, not even mine anymore. The surface had iced over perfectly smooth, like it had erased every movement from the last couple days. That night, I left one of the documents half fed into the scanner. Didn't hit the button, didn't close the lid. I wanted to see what would happen if I just left it. Sometime after midnight, while I was reading in bed, I heard the scanner hum to life. A single, soft pass. I didn't run up right away. I just sat there, listening. Eventually, I went upstairs. The scanner light was off, like nothing had happened. But the document was still there. Only now a single sentence was underlined in faint pencil. Just one line, not very dark. But it hadn't been marked before. I knew that for sure. I took that page and put it on my nightstand. Still have it. By day 5, files were appearing in folders I hadn't made. New scans, ones I had never seen. Old leases for buildings I'd never heard of. Letters addressed to people with names I didn't recognize. They were all labeled in that same tight handwriting. Some were saved under my name, some weren't. A few of them were dated in the future, like weeks out. That morning, I checked the folder history. Some edits were logged under my account at times I knew I wasn't on the laptop. A few entries didn't have any user tag at all. On the 6th day, I opened a new folder I hadn't noticed before. It was called Final Notice. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a barely legible scan of a burned page. Only the bottom half survived. The second was a will, unsigned, naming me as the primary caretaker of the property. The third was a notarized transfer of ownership form. Neat, clean, clean, with my name in cursive at the bottom, dated for the following Tuesday. It wasn't even my signature style, but I couldn't deny it looked like my handwriting. That was enough for me. I packed a duffel bag, grabbed my boots, and told myself that if the snow let up even a little, I'd make a break for the forestry road in the morning. Before bed, I took the laptop and stuffed it inside the cold wood stove. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. Part of me still wanted to see what it would do next, and that unsettled me more than anything else. In the middle of the night, I woke up. The scanner was running again. Just a faint buzz, one slow pass, then silence. I had unplugged it. This time, I didn't go upstairs. At sunrise, I left. 2 weeks later, I hired a local named Harris to go collect my stuff. He brought it all back in his truck. Said the cabin was fine, but the front door had been standing wide open when he got there. I gave him an extra $50 and thanks for bringing the stuff. I was 26 when it happened. Uncle Ray had passed a few months earlier. Sudden heart failure. He had this old cabin out in the hills past Belridge, Kentucky. I'd only been there once when I was a teenager. After the funeral, the question of what to do with the cabin got passed around the family like a hot potato. My mom wanted to list it, but she'd never been out there and didn't realize how far gone it was. My cousin Micah, who'd spent one weird summer helping Ray stack firewood, said we should burn it and be done with it. Everyone else just shrugged, so I volunteered. I figured I'd drive out, stay a few days, and see whether it was even worth salvaging. I was between jobs at the time and honestly needed the break. My girlfriend had just moved out, the city felt too loud, and the thought of a few quiet days off the grid sounded like the best idea I'd had in months. I left on a Sunday morning right before Christmas. Snow had already come through the week before, one of those early storms that didn't stick around in the city but hit the hills hard. The roads were mostly cleared, but once I turned off the state highway, it got sketchier. Fast patches of black ice, long, unplowed stretches, trees leaning over like they were whispering secrets across the road. My Subaru handled it okay, but I white-knuckled the last few miles. There was no cell signal after the last gas station in Briar Hollow. From there, it was all memory and scribbled directions from Micah. The cabin was just where I remembered it. Small, leaning slightly to the right, half swallowed by trees that looked like they'd been closing in since the 70s. No mailbox, no neighbors, not even tire tracks. Just a sagging roof, a rusted stovepipe, and a porch that groaned when I stepped on it. I'd come prepared. A generator, jugs of water, a big bag of firewood, canned food, a camp stove, and enough coffee to fuel a week of deep introspection. The plan was simple. Rest, maybe read. Fix the door, if I was feeling productive. Mostly, I just wanted quiet. The first day was uneventful. I got the fire going, unboarded a couple of windows to let in some light, and swept out the worst of the debris. The loft upstairs was just big enough for my sleeping bag and a lantern. It smelled like dust and old wood. That night, I fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling and a light wind moving through the trees outside. It felt peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But I woke up sometime after midnight, and what woke me wasn't a noise. It was the absence of one. The fire had burned out. The room felt cold. Still, I rolled over, expecting to hear the last few pops from the stove, but there was nothing. Just silence. It took me a second to realize how complete it was. No wind, no creaking boards, not even the sound of branches tapping the roof. Just dead quiet. I got up, pulled on my boots, and climbed down to load the stove. I just crouched in front of the hearth when I heard it, footsteps outside. Slow, measured crunches in the snow. Close, maybe 10 feet from the porch. I froze. They kept going. They kept going. A couple more steps. Then silence. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing moved. The firewood felt suddenly heavy in my arms. I crept to the window and peered out through a narrow gap between the boards I hadn't fully removed. The moon was up, casting just enough light to make out the clearing in front of the cabin, but the trees swallowed everything past that in darkness. I didn't see anything, but I also didn't hear the footsteps come back, After a minute, I convinced myself it had been a deer, or maybe one of those massive elk you hear about. They'd been spotted more often in the area lately. I went back to the stove, built the fire back up, bolted the door, and returned to the loft. I lay awake for a while, waiting for something else, but nothing came. Eventually, I drifted off, until I heard the doorknob turn. It was subtle but unmistakable, a soft, metallic screech. I knew that sound. I'd heard it earlier that day while testing the lock. The knob was stiff with rust and made that same quiet groan when it moved. It turned just a little, then stopped. I didn't move. I stayed perfectly still in my sleeping bag, eyes open, body tense. My flashlight was right beside me, but I didn't reach for it. A few seconds later, it turned again, slower this time, almost like someone was trying to be quiet. Then silence. No knock, no footsteps, no retreating crunches in the snow, just that. I lay there for hours, literally, until the first pale light started leaking through the trees. When I finally got up, I told myself it was the cold, maybe ice shifting in the frame. Maybe I'd imagined it, I knew I hadn't, but I needed to pretend. Still, I checked the door. The lock was still in place. The chair I'd propped under the knob just in case was untouched. Everything looked normal. I stepped outside. Snow had fallen lightly again, not enough to cover everything, just a dusting. And underneath it, faint impressions. Not boot prints, not really prints at all, just shallow, rounded indentations, wider than a foot. No tread, no clear heel or toe. Just smooth depressions spaced like someone had walked barefoot through the snow, but with feet too long, too flat. They circled the porch and ended a few paces out in every direction, and then nothing, no trail, no exit path, just gone. I stood there for a while, scanning the woods. Nothing moved. I should have left right then. I thought about it, but the cabin was finally warm. The roads were still rough, and part of me didn't want to go home feeling like I'd been scared off by weird snow shapes and a creaky doorknob. So I stayed one more night. I double-locked the door, wedged the chair again, and brought the axe up to the loft. Not for protection exactly, it just felt better having it nearby. The fire was strong, the cabin was quiet, and I thought maybe I'd sleep. I didn't. Sometime after 3, I heard the front steps creak. One step. Pause. Another. Then nothing. Maybe 15 minutes passed. Another creak. Just one. Like someone shifting their weight, testing each board individually. I stayed still. Didn't get up. Didn't check the window. The steps didn't come in a line. They came in these isolated sounds. One board, then nothing, then another, like someone unsure of the next move. I waited until the sky turned blue. Then I looked outside. No tracks. The snow was pristine. No marks, no prints, no sign anyone had stood there at all. That was it. I packed before the coffee even finished heating. Threw everything in the back of the Subaru. Didn't bother locking up. I left the windows open, the fire burning down to ash. I just wanted to be gone. Driving down the ridge, the snow started up again. Big, slow flakes. I didn't see another car for 2 hours. When I finally stopped for gas in Larkspur, I asked the clerk if anyone still lived up near Hollow Creek. He gave me this long look before shaking his head. Not up there, he said. Not in a long time. I didn't say anything else. A week later, Micah called to tell me the cabin had burned down. Lightning strike, apparently. I was 31 when I stayed at my cousin Lena's cabin. She'd just finished getting the place fully off-grid solar set up, propane heat, satellite internet, compost toilet, the whole deal, and didn't want it sitting empty while she was down in Louisiana visiting her in-laws. I'd just quit my job in Durham and figured a quiet week up near the Jefferson Ridge would help me sort my head out. The second morning I woke up to the sound of the stovepipe creaking. Not a weird noise really. Metal shifts when it's cold. But when I went to poke the fire back to life, I saw the stove door was ajar. Not wide open, just cracked. Lena had shown me how to bolt it shut the right way, otherwise it swings loose and leaks smoke into the room. I was almost positive I'd latched it the night before. Still, maybe I'd been tired. I clamped it again and chalked it up to sleep fuzz. Later that afternoon, I noticed my left boot was turned completely around heel toward the door, toe pointed at the wall. I always line them up just inside the threshold. Lena's rule: no tracking in snow. I stood there for a while just staring at it, trying to figure out if I could have knocked it like that coming in. Maybe the rubber had caught on the mat. I nudged it back into place and made soup. That night, the tapping started. Just a single tap, then nothing. Then, maybe 20 minutes later, another. Never rhythmic. Not fast. Just one clean, distinct knot like bone on wood. Definitely not the stove, not the fridge, not a squirrel in the eaves. It had this weird timing to it, like it was waiting for silence. At one point, more out of boredom than bravery, I set my book down and said, "If something's in here, knock twice." Nothing happened. And of course, I immediately felt like an idiot for saying it out loud. But I didn't hear any more knocks that night. The next morning, I found the dish towel hanging off a drawer handle instead of draped over the sink where I'd left it. Same towel, same drawer I hadn't touched. I walked the whole cabin main room, kitchenette, loft. Everything else looked normal. Still, I started locking the deadbolt during the day, just because. That afternoon, the internet cut out in the middle of a video chat with my friend Eli. I got signal back maybe 10 minutes later. The router's activity log showed a weird spike around 4 a.m. I definitely hadn't been online then. Lena had mentioned the snow sometimes messed with the satellite, so I tried not to read into it. But that evening, the woodpile had changed. I'd stacked it myself. 4 neat rows, back porch flush against the railing. That night, the third row looked like someone had dragged a hand across the top. Not toppled, just warped. Logs shifted slightly forward, like a ripple through the line. I stood there breathing fog in the cold, looking for prints in the snow. Nothing. No animal tracks. No wind strong enough to do that. Not even my own boot prints, which should have been fresh. That's when I made a hot toddy and turned every light on. No music, no book, no book. I just sat and stared at the stove, waiting for the tap. It came. But this time, it came from above me. I didn't move. Just stared up toward the loft stairs, watching the shadows where the beams met the ceiling. A second tap followed. Softer this time. Closer. 2 in a row. I didn't go up there. I wrapped myself in the blanket and stayed on the couch until morning. By then, I was ready to call Lena and say, "Hey, your cabin's weird. I'm out." But when I went to grab my charger from the kitchen drawer, I found something else instead. A folded piece of legal pad paper, neatly torn, blank on the back. On the front was a pencil-drawn grid, 3 columns, 5 rows. 1 X, dead center. That's it. No writing, no other marks. I hadn't brought any paper like that. And Lena's basically allergic to clutter. She would never leave loose notes around. I set it on the counter and went out for air. That's when I saw the footprints. Not boots, bare feet, 5 toes. Small. They started at the back steps, led to the woodpile, then just stopped. No return trail. No melting or smearing. Just clean prints in the fresh powder, ending mid-yard. I tried to call Lena. No signal. I tossed the note into the stove, watched it blacken, curl, and vanish. Then I turned back to the kitchen, same counter, same mug, and there was a second note. Same grid, same paper. But now, the X was in the top right square. I didn't burn that one. I folded it up, shoved it in my coat pocket, and went straight to the truck. Dead. Not sluggish. Dead. Nothing. No lights, no turnover. Cables looked fine. I'd driven it 2 days earlier. I sat in the cab with my breath fogging the windshield for a long time. Eventually, I went back inside. The loft had changed. Lena had kept a row of field guides along the railing, birds, plants, mushrooms, that kind of thing. All gone. In their place were 3 objects. My wristwatch, which I hadn't even noticed missing. The charred corner of the first note I'd burned, and my old house keys from Durham. I'd left those keys in my desk drawer back home. I sat on the stairs and just stared at them. The lights flickered once, then held steady. I didn't sleep that night either. Next morning, skies were clear and the satellite was back up. I emailed Lena. Just said something felt off and I was heading out. Didn't ask if it was okay. I packed fast and started down the switchback. The ice made it slow, but I was moving. 10, maybe 15 minutes in, I realized I'd passed the same crooked pine twice. Then a fence post I didn't remember. Then a frozen puddle with a cigarette butt floating in the ice. I stopped, checked my phone map. Nothing made sense. That's when I saw the third note, tacked to a tree with a rusted nail. Same grid. This time the X was in the bottom left. Center. Top right. Bottom left. I turned around and walked back to the cabin. The front door was open. Inside, everything had reset. Boots lined up. Cup rinsed. The burnt paper gone. Field guides back in place. Like I'd never touched a thing. My bag was still packed. My jacket still damp. But the cabin looked like it had on the first day. That night, the taps came again. From the floor this time. Then the ceiling. Then right at the base of the loft stairs. I climbed up. The field guides were fake hollow wooden boxes, painted to look real. Inside one of them was the fourth note. The grid was full now, all 9 boxes marked. At the bottom, a line written in my own handwriting read, "Do not leave until the pattern completes." I don't remember writing that, but I remember reading it and thinking, yeah, that's right. I stayed 3 more nights. Each day, something new shifted. 1 drawer, 1 object, 1 note. Each night, I waited for the taps. On the 4th morning, the truck started like normal. I drove straight down without looking back. The cabin belonged to my uncle. Well, still does, technically, but he hadn't used it since moving down to New Mexico a couple years earlier. It's way up in the hills outside Longvale. I was on winter leave from the maintenance company where I work. We rotate downtime around the holidays and figured I'd stay up there a few days to wait on a replacement part for the furnace. It had gone out the week before Christmas, and since no one was living there full time, it wasn't urgent. But I volunteered. I had time, and I actually like being out there. The quiet is different. It presses in, but not in a bad way. It just makes your thoughts louder. The cabin runs on propane and has solar for backup, which was mostly enough to keep it functional. Water's well fed. Heat comes from a combo of a small furnace and a big old stone fireplace. There's a backup kerosene lamp and a wood stove in the kitchen that still works if you treat it right. I'd stayed there before, just never alone. That first night was fine. I brought a few groceries, some firewood, and an old radio that only picked up 1 local channel half the time. The snow had started light that morning, just enough to coat the yard and blur the footprints I made walking to the shed. The slope behind the house faces east, and I remember standing there for a while in the afternoon, just watching the wind move across the trees. That's when I noticed the new trail in the snow. It was a straight line coming out of the woods, 1 set of boot prints, deep and direct, like someone had walked right out of the trees and made a beeline for the back of the cabin. I didn't panic. It's not unusual to get a stray hunter or hiker up there, especially if they don't realize the land is still privately owned. I assumed they'd wandered close and turned back. But when I followed the prints with my eyes, something felt off. There were no return steps. Just a single track, starting at the tree line and ending about 5 feet from the back porch. I opened the door and leaned out, just to confirm. Still nothing. Just that one path ending in the snow, like the person had walked straight up and vanished. I stood there for a long time, looking out across the slope. It was quiet, really quiet. The kind of stillness where your ears start grabbing for sound. Eventually, I grabbed my jacket and boots and stepped out, more curious than anything. I followed the prints maybe 20 yards down the hill before something gave me pause. Not a noise, just this weird gut-level unease. The kind that doesn't come from anything you can name. The prints had a sort of dragging quality to them. Like the person had been limping, or maybe they were pulling something. Hard to say. But then I noticed something stranger. The left prints were deeper than the right, which might make sense if the person was carrying gear or favoring one leg. But the left ones didn't look like normal boots. No defined toe shape. just wide, heavy ovals, like someone was walking with snowshoes, but only on one side, or something round, pressing down flat. I stopped, turned back to make sure I could still see the cabin. I could, just barely. I didn't go any farther, went back inside, locked the door. That night, I made sure the fire was burning strong, stoked it higher than usual. I left the kerosene lamp on and kept my boots by the door. I didn't feel scared exactly, just keyed up, hyper-aware. Every creak felt louder than it should have. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a different smell. Not wood smoke, sharper, like wet ash or something damp thrown on the fire. The kind of smell that clings in your throat a little. I came downstairs with the flashlight, expecting maybe a wet log had shifted. The fire looked fine, nothing obviously wrong, but the smoke wasn't rising like it should have. It was hanging low, drifting near the floor instead of lifting up the chimney. That was weird. I swept the beam across the living room, everything in place. No movement, no open windows. But then I heard it. The stairs creaked. It was a subtle sound, not a full groan, more like pressure, like someone shifting their weight slowly. I aimed the flashlight at the stairwell and held still. Nothing there. But when I stepped closer, I noticed something on the 3rd stair. That one always squeaks. It's warped in the middle. There was a dark line across it. Moisture. Just one thin, melted line running along the edge of the tread, curving slightly. Like something cold had stepped there, left just enough to melt a trail in the warm air, and kept going. That stair doesn't get wet from boots. It's indoors, always dry. I didn't go back up. I sat in the living room the rest of the night, every light on, waiting for the sun. The next morning, I went outside again. The original prints were gone. Snow and wind had swept most of the slope clean. But around the cabin, there was something new. Another trail. This one circled the cabin once. A full loop. Long, narrow indentations, shallow like a blade, had skimmed the surface. Too smooth to be footprints. Too precise to be random. The spacing was even, like a compass had drawn a perfect ring around the house. I stared at them for a long time, told myself it was an animal. Some kind of weird sliding motion, a deer slipping maybe, something innocent. I stayed. I still don't know why. The delivery was due that afternoon, and I clung to that routine. Like keeping the plan was safer than breaking it. The text showed up just after 4. Guy was maybe 25, quiet. Didn't seem to notice anything unusual. I signed the sheet, took the part, didn't say a word about the tracks. He drove off. Didn't look back. That night, I locked every door and window, pushed the kitchen table up against the back door, wedged a broom handle into the sliding latch. I even set a baking pan full of coins on the stairs, just something to make noise if anything moved. I had the flashlight in my lap, splitting maul next to the couch. I didn't even try to pretend I was calm. The coins didn't move, but something breathed. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the vents, but it followed me. Wherever I stood in the room, I could hear it just behind me. Light, shallow, always moving with me, never louder than a whisper. When I paused near the hallway, it stopped. When I stepped toward the kitchen, it started again. I turned off the lamp, just sat in the dark with the fire flickering. Then I heard the coins scatter, not loud, not sharp, just a quiet ripple, like something brushed through them with no hurry at all. I didn't see anything. That was it. I packed my bag, threw on my coat, and left. It belonged to my cousin Jenna, but that winter she picked up a temporary job down in Asheville and told me I could stay there while she was gone. I just wrapped up a rough contract in Chicago and thought the change of scenery might help clear my head. Something slower, quieter, simple. The house sat about 6 miles outside of a little speck on the map called Marlow Ridge. I think technically the address said Black Hollow, which sounded dramatic, but it was really just hills, trees, and the occasional dented mailbox. The place was way up on a ridge, past a radio tower and a bunch of forgotten switchbacks that looked like they hadn't been salted since Halloween. You couldn't even see another house from the driveway. The week before Christmas, A storm rolled in and parked itself over the ridge. I wasn't worried. I'd already stocked up on groceries and cleared the deck twice with a big old aluminum shovel Jenna kept in the basement. My plan was to hunker down, maybe finish a couple pieces I'd been procrastinating on. I figured I could ride it out easy. And I would have, except that Thursday night, the power cut out. It was about 10, maybe a little after. I'd already seen the lights flickering that afternoon, especially in the kitchen. You know that faint buzz when a bulb is about to go? Yeah, so it didn't come as a complete shock. I lit a few candles from the cupboard and found the kerosene lantern in the basement, the one Jenna told me not to use unless it was absolutely necessary. That night felt necessary. My phone still had some charge, around 20%, but no signal, not even a flicker. That was fine though. I'd expected spotty reception out there. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud. I actually might have missed it if I hadn't just sat down with the lantern beside me. Just this dull, uneven tap from the back door. The one that led out to the deck and faced nothing but trees and darkness. At first, I figured it was a branch, maybe a pine cone dropping onto the wood or some snow sliding off the roof. But it happened again. 3 knocks, all soft, slow, very deliberate. My stomach dropped a little. There was absolutely no reason anyone should have been out there. The snow was deep. No cars had come up the drive, and there were no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. I didn't move at first, just listened. Waited to hear something else. Footsteps. A voice. The knock again. Nothing. Eventually I crept toward the kitchen, keeping the lantern low. The curtains over the door's little window were drawn tight. I lifted one edge with my fingers, just barely enough to peek through. Just woods, a lot of white, no prints, nothing moving, no shape, no sound. I stood there a while, not scared exactly, just wired. Every sound felt like it was pushing in too close. Eventually I returned to the living room and set myself up on the couch with the lantern and a fire still crackling. I stayed up a while, thinking maybe I was overreacting. At some point around 3, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the fire had burned down to ash. The lantern had gone out too, and there were boot prints in the living room. Not a lot of them, maybe 4 or 5. Just wet, dark patches leading from the back door and stopping short of the couch. Snow melted into the rug, like whoever it was had just come in, stood there, and what? Watched me? I remember staring at them for a long time. Then I checked the lock on the back door, still latched. Same position I'd left it in. The curtains hadn't moved. No windows open. I checked every room, every closet, even behind the shower curtain. Nothing. I opened the door to the deck. Still no prints on the stairs, but there were some coming over the side rail. A few faded impressions in the snow where someone had clearly stepped up from the slope below. No prints leading back. I didn't tell Jenna, or anyone. I just stood in the kitchen and tried to come up with a logical explanation. Sleepwalking was the first one I landed on. I even considered that maybe I'd somehow brought the snow in myself without realizing it. But that didn't explain the way the footprints just stopped. That night, it happened again. I was sitting on the couch around 11, just reading with the lantern burning beside me when the knock came back. This time, it was louder. Same door. Same slow rhythm at first, 3 even taps. Then nothing. Then, after maybe a minute, it came again. 2 short knocks. Then, 1 long. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe hard. Just sat there staring at the curtains thinking, if I look, and something's right there, what then? I opened my phone, just on reflex. Still no signal. But I typed out a message anyway, something like, if something happens, I'm at Jenna's place. Power's out. Someone's at the door. I didn't send it, just kept it there in the app, ready. Eventually, like before, the sound stopped. I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, holding the unlit lantern in my lap until the sun came up, just watching the curtain and listening for the sound of snow shifting outside. The next morning, no footprints, no melted patches on the rug. But the curtain was different. It had been drawn shut before I went to bed. Now it was open about an inch, just enough to let someone see in. That was the moment it really hit me. Someone had touched it. On the third night, I decided not to wait for anything. At a little past 11, I turned off every light in the house, even the fire. I stood in the dark by the kitchen, facing the back door with the lantern in my hand, unlit. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then, I saw it. Not a person exactly, not a face or figure, just a shift in the darkness behind the window, like someone gently swaying from side to side, barely moving. No noise, no knock. But I knew someone was there. I don't know how. I couldn't see anything clearly, but my body just knew. It was like the air in the room changed. I backed into the hallway and stayed there until morning. I didn't sleep. I didn't move from that spot. When it got light enough, I went out to check the deck. No prints. But a long, wide trail had been dragged away from the porch and into the trees. Not footprints. Just a smooth, wide groove in the snow, like something had been pulled. I packed up before I even made coffee, threw my gear in the car, and drove down that winding road with both hands clenched on the wheel. It wasn't until I got near Elkins that I had a signal again.